In the back seat of his luxury car, the millionaire held the weak little girl close to his chest. Her tiny face had turned pale, her eyes slowly closing as if life itself was slipping away. He looked at her with fear in his eyes, fear he had never known before. What happened next inside that car would change his heart forever. Don't miss a single second. Watch till the end. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the glass walls of Reed Enterprises. Kingsley Reed stepped out of the tall, sleek building, loosening the cuffs of his designer shirt. It had been another long day of meetings, numbers, and decisions that could change the fate of entire companies. His mind was still busy calculating contracts and investments when a strange tension caught his attention. There was a murmur in the air, soft, uneasy voices gathering near the corner of the busy street. He slowed his pace, curiosity knitting his brows. A small crowd had formed, their bodies angled inward toward something on the ground. The usual city chaos seemed to hush around that spot, as though time had paused. Kingsley's eyes, sharp and trained to notice detail, caught a glimpse of movement among the sea of legs. A flash of gold, hair, not sunlight, tangled and messy. And then he saw her. She was so small, almost lost between the towering bodies around her. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, lay crumpled on the cold pavement. Her golden hair was knotted, strands sticking to her pale cheeks. The contrast of her fragile body against the hard gray street made something twist deep in Kingsley's chest. Her tiny fingers were wrapped tightly around a worn-out cloth doll. Its stitched smile was faded, one button eye missing. The doll had clearly been loved fiercely, and yet it looked as tired as the child holding it. Her lips quivered faintly, her breathing shallow and uneven. Kingsley's steps quickened before his mind had even decided to move. He could hear people murmuring, "Where's her mother? Is she okay? Should someone call an ambulance?" But no one was kneeling beside her, no one was touching her. Perhaps they were afraid, unsure, or simply waiting for someone else to act. That someone became Kingsley. He pushed his way through, his tall frame parting the circle. The faint smell of street dust and city fumes hit him, but all he saw was the child. His expensive leather shoes stopped inches from her small form. Kneeling down, his shadow covered her like a shield from the curious stares above. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" His voice, usually so controlled and commanding in boardrooms, softened into something unfamiliar. Her eyelids fluttered, a weak attempt to respond. But her gaze was unfocused and no words came. Her breathing was shallow, too shallow. Kingsley felt his heartbeat pick up, thudding hard in his chest. For a moment, the world around him faded into a blur. It was just him and this little stranger, a helpless stranger. She looked as if she might slip away if he didn't do something. Kingsley didn't hesitate. He didn't call for anyone else. He simply acted. Sliding one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, he lifted her gently. Her head lolled slightly against his chest, and he adjusted his hold so her face rested near the crook of his neck. She was frighteningly light, as though she hadn't eaten enough in days. Her tiny hands loosened their grip on the doll for a second, then clutched it again as if afraid to let go. Kingsley's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but something about her fragility hit him in a place he didn't know existed. He could feel the faint rhythm of her breaths against him, each one precious and uncertain. Without another glance at the crowd, he rose to his full height. "Make way," he said firmly, and the people instinctively stepped aside. His long strides carried him toward the curb, toward where his sleek black car waited. The city noise returned around them. Honking cars, snippets of conversation, the distant hum of traffic. But to Kingsley, everything felt muted. All that mattered was the small life in his arms. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she came from. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't just walk away. That day, without even realizing it, Kingsley Reed's perfectly controlled life had just changed forever. "Get the car! Now!" Kingsley's voice cut through the air like a blade. Low, controlled, but carrying an urgency that made people instinctively move. Carter, his driver of nearly 10 years, reacted instantly. He swung open the rear passenger door of the sleek black sedan and stepped aside. Kingsley adjusted the little girl in his arms as if she were made of glass. The fine wool of his suit scratched lightly against her cheek, and she made a soft, weak sound, half a whimper, half a sigh. He slid into the back seat, not in his usual composed manner, but with the careful movement of a man who knew he was carrying something far more precious than his wealth or reputation. The leather seat welcomed them, but the chill of her small body seeped through his shirt almost immediately. Kingsley's instincts flared. She was far too cold. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his tailored coat and wrapped it snugly around her, tucking the edges in so not a sliver of cold could reach her. His hands lingered for a moment, feeling the faint rise and fall of her chest beneath the fabric. "Hospital, sir?" Carter's deep, steady voice floated back through the rearview mirror. Kingsley's answer was immediate, his tone carrying a weight of command. "Fast as you can, Carter. No delays." "Yes, sir." The engine roared to life, and the car surged forward, smoothly weaving into traffic. The city blurred past the tinted windows, glowing storefronts, rushing pedestrians, streaks of light, but Kingsley's attention was locked entirely on the child in his arms. Her head rested beneath his chin now, and he could feel the warmth of her breath against his skin, though it was faint and uneven. He shifted her slightly so her head was supported, his arm cradling her as though the movement of the car might jostle her too much. He had carried priceless art before. He had signed deals worth billions, but nothing had ever made his heart pound the way it did now. With his free hand, Kingsley gently brushed a strand of tangled golden hair away from her face. Her lashes trembled, her cheeks were pale, and her lips had a bluish tint that made his chest tighten. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured, words so soft and foreign on his own tongue that he almost didn't recognize his voice. "You're safe now, so I've got you." She made a faint sound, almost like a small hum, and her fingers twitched, clutching at the coat he had wrapped around her. Kingsley adjusted his position so she could rest more comfortably, pulling her close enough that he could feel the fragile rhythm of her heartbeat against him. Every bump in the road made him instinctively tighten his hold. Carter drove with a precision and speed that came from years of trust, threading through lanes, ignoring the curious glances from other drivers. Kingsley found himself watching the small rise and fall of her chest more than the passing cityscape. He didn't even know her name. He didn't know if someone was searching for her or if she had been left behind entirely, but none of that mattered right now. "Just hold on, little one," he whispered again. His thumb traced a gentle line over the back of her tiny hand, cold and limp against his palm. The steady hum of the engine seemed to create a small cocoon of sound around them, shutting out the rest of the world. Outside, the city rushed by. Inside, it was just a man and a child, one desperately holding on, the other silently promising not to let go. As the car neared the hospital district, Kingsley could feel the tension in his own shoulders. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, but at that moment, his entire world hinged on the strength of a 5-year-old girl he had never met before. He didn't understand why it mattered so much. He only knew that it did. Somehow she felt important, like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was missing. And in the soft, quiet space of the back seat, he made an unspoken vow. Whatever this child's story was, he would see it through to the end. The moment the car screeched to a stop at the hospital entrance, Kingsley threw the door open. He didn't wait for the driver to get out. He moved with a purpose that drew quick glances from bystanders. Melissa, though he still didn't know her name, lay limp in his arms, her head tucked against him, her tiny hands still gripping the edge of his coat. A pair of nurses spotted him instantly. "We'll take her," one of them said, her tone urgent but calm. Kingsley hesitated, his arms tightening slightly before he let them lift her away. He hated the feeling of her being carried by someone else, but reason told him they could help her faster than he could. The swinging doors of the emergency ward swallowed her small figure, leaving Kingsley standing in the corridor, his hands still tingling from where her fragile weight had rested. The antiseptic scent of the hospital filled his lungs as he began to pace. He was not a man who paced. In boardrooms, he was a pillar of control, unshakable, deliberate. But now, with every minute ticking by, a restless energy coursed through him. He told himself she was just a stranger, a lost child. This wasn't his problem. But that lie didn't hold for even a second. The image of her pale face, the faint tremble of her lips, the way she clung to that worn doll, it all replayed in his mind like a film he couldn't turn off. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Time stretched in the sterile hallway, his leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor as he walked back and forth. He caught himself glancing at the double doors every few seconds, waiting for them to open. After what felt like hours, though the wall clock insisted it had been less than one, the doors finally swung wide. A nurse in pale blue scrubs stepped out, scanning the corridor until her eyes landed on him. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, checking a chart. "Yes," Kingsley replied instantly, stepping forward. "She's stable now," the nurse said, her voice softening as if she knew how much those words would mean. "It was mild dehydration and exhaustion, nothing too serious, but she was in need of immediate care." Kingsley let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders eased slightly. "Can I see her?" "In a moment," the nurse assured. Then she added, "She's resting now. We've given her fluids and a light blanket. She should recover with rest and care." Kingsley's gaze sharpened. "What's her name?" The nurse looked at her chart again. "She told us her name is Melissa." Melissa. The name wrapped itself around him unexpectedly, sinking into his mind as if it had always belonged there. The nurse hesitated. "She also said she has no one." Kingsley frowned. "No one." The nurse's expression was touched with sadness. Her words were, "My mommy never came back." The weight of those 6 words pressed down on Kingsley like a stone. He imagined her small figure waiting, hoping, until hope itself faded into exhaustion. The thought made something in his chest twist painfully. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering near his temple. There was no logic to explain it, but in that moment, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't walk away from Melissa. Something inside him, something protective and fierce, had snapped awake. And whatever had just begun here, it wasn't going to end with him leaving her behind. The faint beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the small hospital room. Melissa lay against the crisp white sheets, her little body half swallowed by the blanket. Her golden hair fanned across the pillow, still slightly tangled, and her small hands curled protectively around the worn cloth doll she had never let go of. When Kingsley stepped inside, he moved quietly, almost cautiously, as though afraid to disturb the fragile calm surrounding her. Her blue eyes opened slowly, catching the light. They were bright but shadowed, like a sky holding back a storm. He stopped at the foot of her bed for a moment, just taking her in. Then, stepping closer, he spoke gently. "Hi," he said, his voice a low, warm murmur. "I'm Kingsley. How are you feeling?" Melissa blinked up at him, the corners of her mouth twitching in the smallest of smiles. She clutched her doll tighter as if it gave her courage. "Better," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." Kingsley felt something in his chest soften in a way it hadn't in years. He nodded. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Then, after a pause, he asked, "Where do you live, Melissa?" Her gaze dropped to the blanket, her tiny fingers picking at a loose thread. I don't have a real home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit him like a quiet blow, but she wasn't finished. "My mommy said—" She hesitated, her throat working as she swallowed. "My daddy didn't want me." Kingsley's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, the sterile walls closing in. He sat down on the edge of the bed, leaning closer so he could see her face. "Melissa," he said softly, Do you know your daddy's name?" She tilted her head, her small brow furrowed in thought. Her voice, when it came, was tentative but certain enough to pierce through the air. "Reed," she said. Kingsley froze. His body went still, but inside everything was moving. Memories, fragments, unanswered questions. The hum of the hospital faded. Even the steady beep of the monitor seemed distant. "Melissa." His voice was slow, careful. "What's your mommy's name?" She said it. The name hit him like a thunderclap, sharp, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. For a split second, his mind was back in another time, years ago, Before the tailored suits, the skyscraper office, the endless board meetings, there had been her, a woman he had loved with all the reckless certainty of youth. They had made plans, spoken about a future, dreamed together. And then, one day, she was gone. No letter, no explanation, just gone. He had searched for her for a while, but the demands of life and the pull of ambition had eventually buried the ache under layers of work and time. He had told himself she had moved on, that whatever they'd shared was over. But she hadn't just left him. She had left carrying something far more important. The little girl looking up at him now wasn't just a stranger he had saved on the street. She wasn't just Melissa. She was his daughter. The realization cracked something deep inside him, a mix of disbelief, awe, and a fierce, protective instinct that surged through him like fire. He looked into her eyes again, truly seeing her for the first time. And there, in those clear blue depths, he recognized something achingly familiar. The same shade as his own, framed by a softness he had once seen in her mother's gaze. Kingsley had missed 5 years of her life. 5 years of first steps, first words, bedtime stories, and morning cuddles. 5 years he could never get back. But as he sat there, the truth settling heavy and certain in his chest, one thought became crystal clear. He would not miss a single day more. Kingsley's hand rested on the edge of the hospital bed, his fingers brushing against the soft fold of the blanket. He had faced boardroom battles that could turn ruthless men into cowards. He had stood in front of investors who demanded answers for millions of dollars at stake. He had made decisions that altered the future of entire companies. But none of that had ever made his heart race the way it did now. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment press against his chest. Her small face tilted toward him, blue eyes searching his as though she sensed there was something important about to be said. "Melissa." His voice came out quieter than he intended, almost a whisper. "I'm your daddy." For a heartbeat, she just stared, her eyes blinking slowly as though trying to understand the words. Then, like a sudden burst of sunlight through clouds, her expression shifted. "You're my daddy?" she asked, her tone trembling, both afraid and hopeful. Kingsley nodded slowly, his throat thick. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." His hand reached for hers, that tiny, delicate hand that had been clutching her doll for dear life. When their fingers touched, something electric and certain passed between them, something no DNA test could ever confirm more strongly than this moment. "I'm never letting you go again," he said, the promise in his voice iron strong. "Not for a single day." Melissa's lips quivered. For a moment he thought she might cry, but instead she moved forward, slow at first, and then with sudden urgency. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so little. Her cheek pressed against his shoulder, warm and damp with the beginning of tears. "I waited for you," she whispered, her voice so small it felt like a secret she had been holding inside for years. Kingsley's breath caught and he closed his eyes. The guilt, sharp and heavy, pressed in on him. She had been out there all this time, wondering, waiting, believing her father didn't want her. And he hadn't even known. His hand came up to the back of her head, fingers tangling gently in her soft hair. "I'm here now," he murmured, "and I will always be here." She nodded against him, her little body relaxing for the first time since he'd seen her. It was as if hearing those words allowed her to set down a burden far too big for someone so small. The world outside the hospital room kept moving. People rushing through corridors, phones ringing, announcements being made. But in here, in this fragile bubble of time, nothing existed except a father and his daughter finding each other at last. Kingsley felt something shift inside him. The relentless drive that had pushed him to build an empire suddenly felt smaller. Not unimportant, but no longer the center of his world. This, holding her, hearing her breath against his ear, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, this was the center now. He realized with startling clarity that he would trade every luxury he owned, every deal he'd ever made, every dollar in his bank account, just to keep her safe and loved. "I'm sorry I wasn't there before," he whispered into her hair. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes glistening but steady. "It's okay," she said simply, as though forgiveness was the easiest thing in the world. His heart squeezed. No, he thought, it's not okay, but I'll make it right. And there, with the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the warmth of her arms around him, Kingsley silently vowed he would never let Melissa feel alone again. That night, Kingsley took Melissa home. She sat on his lap in the back seat again, but this time her head rested peacefully against his chest. He had missed her first steps, her first words, but he wouldn't miss another moment. He had a home full of rooms, yet it had always felt empty. Now, it finally felt alive. For the first time in years, Kingsley felt whole. The lesson was clear. Family is not about blood, you know. It's about the love you choose to give. No child should feel unwanted or alone. When you see someone in need, step in. You might just be rescuing a piece of your own heart.